Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. Donald Trump says Russia's President Putin has let him down over the war in Ukraine and the conflict is more complex than he thought. US talk show host Jimmy Kimmel has been taken off air over comments he made about the shooting of right-wing influencer Charlie Kirk. Mass strikes bring France to a standstill as unions challenge the new Prime Minister over budget cuts. To our top story, President Donald Trump has said Putin has let him down and that he wants all the Israeli hostages released now while speaking at a press conference alongside Prime Minister Keir Starmer. The two world leaders spoke after spending the day together at Chequers during Trump's state visit to the UK. The president also said the two countries will always be friends and their bond was like no other. Here's more of what both leaders had to say.
So this partnership today is a signal of our determination to win this race together and to ensure it brings real benefits in jobs, in growth, in lower bills, to put more hard-earned cash in people's pockets at the end of each month. That's what we're determined to deliver.
And we're grateful beyond words for the spectacular honor of the state visit yesterday at Windsor Castle, hosted by His Majesty King Charles III and Her Majesty Queen Camilla. These are two fantastic people. We're forever joined and we are forever friends and we will always be friends. This enduring connection is why I was thrilled that the United Kingdom was the very first country with which we made a historic trade deal and a very good trade deal. He's a tough negotiator. I think it was a better deal for you than us, but these are minor details.
It's a very good deal for both of us.
He's a great negotiator.
Let's go live to Washington now and speak to Republican strategist Adolfo Franco. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Great to have you on. Do you think Donald Trump has managed to achieve his state visit wish list?
Oh, I think so. I think this was a picture-perfect state visit in terms of the image of President Trump that he wanted to project, certainly in the United States and globally. Even the pomp and circumstance with the king was extremely important to the president and to his image. Secondly, on the business side of it, there are differences with Britain, but this is as friendly as it gets. To have the president correctly say that we are joined, have always been joined, and will continue to be our strongest ally. And then the prime minister referring to the special bond. That bond can sometimes be tested a bit, but it's never going to be broken. So that was achieved. The larger items in the agenda that were important were highlighted, that were positive, of course, the tech deal and so forth, and our foreign policy issues where we coincide. Things that are, where there are differences, so we can talk about them, they were largely glossed over. And that means that whatever is being discussed is done in private and that special relationship continues. President Trump has never been shy to try to sometimes even test other leaders publicly and say things that are quite undiplomatic. He did not do any of that in this instance.
Yes, indeed, President Donald Trump was almost the perfect guest. But Keir Starmer did discuss with President Trump ways to increase defense support for Ukraine and how to unite in ending the suffering in the Middle East. Do you think the royal family's soft power made a difference and actually helped Keir Starmer shift Trump's stance on Vladimir Putin and Israel?
I actually think it did. I know President Trump, and he's not a frivolous person, but this was probably, no pun intended here, a crowning moment in his presidency for both terms. This was extraordinarily significant. I understand in terms of even British standards, this is a little higher than normal in terms of the pomp and circumstance. And that meant a lot to President Trump. And this is why the royal family has been effectively used here and other places by the British government. It does soften it. No coincidence, this came before, of course, the actual business talks at Chequers. So I think that is absolutely the case. There still are differences, but there's certainly now, I think, a willingness. There was before, but this sweetener of trying to split the difference on some of these items, specifically with respect to Russia, I think there's an agreement, and I think you had it from the Prime Minister. President's position is certain countries in Europe need to stop buying energy, gas and oil from Russia, and the Prime Minister agreed with that. And I think President Trump, after this meeting, is probably more likely to be even tougher than he's already been with President Putin to date. With respect to Gaza and the Middle East, I think the Prime Minister's statements were very reassuring to the president. It was quite a rebuke of Hamas. Its past and future role, which is none, according to the British Prime Minister, which is certainly the U.S. position. The two-state solution issue, there are differences, but again, those were glossed over to send a signal to the world that we are united on the larger issues and on the details we need to still continue to work privately.
So let's drill down a little bit more. In his speech, President Trump said, Putin has really let me down. You touched on sanctions there, but is it time for the US to put tougher sanctions on Russia? And many people and many critics will say Donald Trump was manipulated by Vladimir Putin. European leaders did try to say this to him, and now he seems to be coming around to that idea.
Well, a couple of things. Initially, the Alaska summit, as you might recall, European leaders applauded it and applauded the effort. And there was an effort here. Had President Trump not done this effort and this outreach, I think it has had some effect, believe it or not, or potentially even in the future. He doesn't want to shut off the Putin government totally the way the previous administration did. But to your question, which is an excellent question, yes, those were his exact words. He's disappointed. He's disappointed because I think he believed that Putin would be able to come to the table without taking the next steps, which he had threatened in terms of sanctions before the Putin meeting. So he gave it a shot, to call it that. He gave it an opportunity. He's, of course, criticized President Zelensky as well, but the focus is now clearly on Putin, who's become even more aggressive. So I think, I don't know if he was manipulated. I don't think that was the word. I think he was actually trying to say, I gave it every chance to try to be resolved peacefully. And if that isn't what happens, then I am prepared to take additional sanctions. And I don't believe Putin believes that or believed that, but he will see a very different Donald Trump now.
And do we assume now, and do you assume that Vladimir Putin, after seeing this united front between the US and the UK and the special relationship in full display in front of the cameras, will this concern the Russian president now?
I think it will concern him, but, and I understand this from totalitarian regimes, they always are skeptical of the West, a lot of talk, and we'll see what the actions are. The actions are the following. Will energy, as the president asked for, will energy sales from Russia dry up from Europe? Will additional sanctions, as President Trump has called for regarding China, which he's imposed tariffs in the US, will Europe do that? Will pressure be put on India from our allies in Europe? So I think Putin will a little bit of wait and see. Yes, he is concerned, to answer your question, but he wants to see the next steps. I don't think he wants to go to the extremes, for example, of taking Russia off the SWIFT banking system, which would complicate their economy significantly, as it did for Iran, or additional sanctions. He would not want that on Russia. But there's also some speculation in Russia, I'm sure, whether Europeans can afford to do what President Trump has done, and whether specifically, not only with energy sales from Russia, but are they willing to really step it up with respect to China and India? And that's where Russia would feel the pain. So yes, concerned, but I don't think alarmed at this stage, because he hasn't been alarmed with threats in the past until he sees decisive action, which is yet to be forthcoming.
And I just want to talk to you a little bit about the elephant in the room. And this question was asked to Donald Trump about Lord Peter Mandelson, who we do know was, of course, the UK ambassador to the USA and was in the White House. He was actually photographed with President Donald Trump in the Oval Office, and President Donald Trump said to him, "Oh, I like your accent." Today, when the question was asked, Donald Trump said, "I don't know who he is," and he completely deflected that question. And we know that Mandelson lost his job over links to Jeffrey Epstein. Why did we get this reply from Donald Trump when we know the truth is he did know Lord Mandelson?
Well, I think what he meant, and I want to be fair here, he meant he does not know him the way. One thing is, I've been in the Oval Office many times, in the White House for photo ops, and Presidents Bush and Reagan have pictures with them and so forth. I don't know if they would say they know me. So that's just a normal photo op. I don't think there was or is a relationship with the ambassador. He was not here that long of a period of time or with President Trump. So I think that's what he meant, to be fair to the president. There's no question that both the prime minister and the president sidestepped the question. You're right. They punted on this. They didn't want to address it directly. They didn't want to get into the Epstein details, so to speak. We all know that's the reason he was recalled, of course, or dismissed. But to be fair here, this is not the president's friend or someone he truly knows, as he knows others in the diplomatic community. And again, sensitive questions, whether it be this one or some others regarding Gaza and the two-state solution and so forth, and censorship in Britain, those are issues that I was clear the two leaders did not want to discuss, and clear, unlike President Trump has done in the past, that he did not want to embarrass the prime minister or offend the British people or government.
So President Trump and said Keir Starmer is a tough negotiator. Do you think the British Prime Minister has done enough to silence his critics and those who were vehemently opposed to President Donald Trump's visit? Because we know in the UK, President Donald Trump isn't seen favourably, especially if we look at his poll ratings.
Well, he's not looked favorably outside the United States, not only in Britain generally. But I will say this, I have looked at polls in Britain, and it seems to me the president's philosophical ally, Nigel Farage, and the Reform Party seem to be doing quite well in the polls. So it seems that Donald Trump's philosophical points of view seem to be gaining ground in Britain, and the prime minister has been struggling in the polls in Britain, at least on domestic issues. So I don't know if, in any shape, way, or form, this was part of the equation of affecting the outcome or anything in Britain. But in terms of the tough negotiator, I actually think the United States has a pretty good deal with the United Kingdom. Of course, the steel issue, which we didn't touch on yet, is a sore subject for the British government, and 25% tariffs, U.S. tariffs on steel, and that was not touched. So when President Trump says you're a good negotiator, that usually means President Trump probably got a good deal as well. Ultimately, I think the prime minister's views, social views, and other views are quite different than the president's. And I don't think he's going to be associated as a Trumper or anything of that kind. Whether some people in Britain believe he hasn't done enough, particularly on steel, is a fair question that remains for the British people to decide.
And you made a really good point there, because the Reform Party in the UK, of course, Nigel Farage is the head of that party, is storming ahead in the polls. And a lot of the problems in the UK is immigration, and he is seen favourably in that light. But Adolfo, before I let you go, let's talk about free speech. Something was kind of glossed over, but there's been criticism from Trump about free speech and, of course, J.D. Vance in the UK, and Elon Musk actually at a far-right rally that we saw happening recently. But overnight, Trump did support the cancelling of Jimmy Kimmel over his comments about Charlie Kirk. Do you think that is hypocrisy from the US president?
I don't at all. And for this reason, Nigel Farage has got a lot of press in the US as well. What he has stressed is that in Britain, what is going on today, he's compared, maybe it is a little bit of hyperbole, Nigel Farage, Britain to North Korea in terms of censorship. What he's referring to, Nigel Farage, is our posts and so forth that occur in Britain, and people are prosecuted by the authorities. In the United States, the Kimmel matter was not a governmental action. The Kimmel matter was a decision by the private sector. Now, there is no First Amendment in our country or free speech with respect to social consequences or private sector market decisions. You can say whatever you want in the United States, and the government can't take action, as apparently is the case in Britain. That's the distinction. The Kimmel situation was a decision by public outcry. The president joined it and agreed with it, but the president didn't force it or make it come about. So there is a huge distinction. Again, one can say in this country, in the United States, what one wants unless it's to incite violence. But that does not mean you have protection on the private sector from actions such as these. The president joked a bit about Kimmel's low television ratings, which is true, but Kimmel was clearly dismissed because of that speech by private sector entities. In Britain, what happened with the arrest of the influencer, which by the way I understand was Irish or American, at least the one that got a lot of press in the US, is governmental control over speech. And there is the distinction. On those matters, I think there is sharp disagreement between the two leaders, but they were not going to be aired publicly.
And sorry, one final thought. I'm going to keep you for one more because I do know that you know Donald Trump. What will he be thinking now on his way home back to the US from the pomp and pageantry, the royal family, how the UK treated him? Will he be pretty happy with himself?
Oh, I think he's coming back in a glow. And I think he will be speaking about this for some time to come. This was, again, a very, very important point in his life and his presidency. And by the way, not only the royal family and all of that, which was enormously effective, and we both know that the royal family is, and I mean this in a polite way, an extension of the British government. The British government uses and approves these events and so forth. But it was effective. It was absolutely effective, and there's nothing wrong with that. It was effective. But in addition to that, I know the body language. He doesn't necessarily agree with all of Prime Minister Starmer's views, but he likes him, and the rapport is good. And the Prime Minister could not have been more gracious and supportive and kind to the president, and that resonates with him. Very different relationship than he has with, for example, President Macron of France, an ally, but a very different relationship. You would not have seen the same Donald Trump had this been taking place in Paris with respect to immigration, censorship, Russia, Gaza. You would have seen a much more combative President Trump, and certainly with respect to Spanish Prime Minister Sanchez. Again, another ally.
Adolfo Franco, I did think Donald Trump had a real buzz about him, and he was definitely a gracious guest. Thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate your time. We can now go to Al Arabiya senior correspondent Carina Kamel. And Carina, we're going to talk to you all about the business and finance side. Gosh, it's been a super busy day of deals after the pomp and pageantry yesterday. Trump and Starmer signed this groundbreaking tech partnership. What are the details of this?
Well, Prime Minister Keir Starmer and pretty much everybody in the British government will be breathing a sigh of relief after Air Force One took off from the United Kingdom, or Marine One at least departed from Chequers, that the state visit went off without a hitch, and the United Kingdom signed a landmark technology agreement with the United States. They're calling it the Tech Prosperity Deal. It's a blueprint for a new partnership in the tech space, and it focuses on 3 specific areas. artificial intelligence, AI, quantum computing, and also nuclear power generation, civic nuclear power generation. And some of the numbers that have been mentioned by both leaders are staggering, quite frankly. Prime Minister Starmer talked about 250 billion pounds sterling flowing across the Atlantic, so implying that that's sort of the totality of the size of the deal across both sides of the Atlantic. President Trump talked about 350 billion US dollars have been galvanized through these deals. Prime Minister Starmer talked about it being the biggest of its kind in British history. So who are we talking about? What are these deals? Chief among them is the investment that was announced by Microsoft, 30 billion US dollars over the next 4 years. We're talking about capital expenditure increases. Microsoft is going to be providing the United Kingdom with 23,000 advanced AI chips. Google parent Alphabet has talked about 5 billion pounds sterling for AI and for research infrastructure over the next 2 years. Blackstone, 90 billion pounds sterling to establish data centers over the next decade. Palantir, 1.5 billion pounds, and Nvidia. And this is a really interesting one because we saw those tech titans at the state banquet last night in Windsor Castle. Some of them, like Jensen Huang, the CEO of Nvidia, Sam Altman, Tim Cook, they were all there and they were leading this partnership that's been announced today. Jensen Huang, the CEO of Nvidia, talked about an 11 billion pound supercomputer that Nvidia, along with 2 other companies, is going to help the United Kingdom build right here so that in Britain, the United Kingdom will have the largest AI infrastructure in all of Europe. And he described this as the Goldilocks moment for the United Kingdom. And essentially what it comes down to, it's a win-win for both the United States and Britain because they both want to dominate and win the AI race. And also, we have to remember that who are they competing against? China. So it makes sense if they can join forces and compete with China in this very promising space.
Yes, indeed. Lots of big money today. But in both speeches today, President Donald Trump said there is no inflation in the US and also said without tariffs, the US would only have a fraction of current investment. How accurate is his assessment of the economic picture?
So Donald Trump likes to tout how much money the U.S. government is bringing in or can bring in the future from these tariffs. He sees the tariffs as a key revenue tool and also as a negotiating tactic to improve the trade relationships with other parts of the world. And also, as we discussed, to bring manufacturing facilities, but also jobs back to the United States. But if we look at the actual figures released by the U.S. government, according to official data, in June 2025, tariff revenue reached 28 billion US dollars. That's triple what it had reached in the same month the previous year. So yes, tariff revenues are higher, have been higher in the previous year. Now, according to the Congressional Budget Office, it's an independent body within Congress that issues financial and economic reports. According to the Congressional Budget Office, the tariffs essentially will cut government borrowing by 2035, so over the next 10 years, by $2.5 trillion. Now, that's all good news, and that all implies that what Donald Trump says is accurate. But then you have to take into account some of the other factors. For example, the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, also says that tariffs could have a larger effect of essentially shrinking the economy, shrinking economic activity, because costs are higher for companies, so they hire less people, and essentially economic activity grinds down. The other thing is the tax cuts. We talked about the big, beautiful bill that was passed on July 4th. Massive tax cuts contained in that bill. So potentially the cost of the tax cuts to the US government, along with the shrinking of the economy, could cancel out any revenue coming from the tariffs. So the verdict's still out on that. On the second point to do with inflation, the last reading we had for the Personal Consumption Expenditure Index, that's the preferred measure of inflation, was 2.6% exactly. It's higher than the 2% targeted by the Fed. And last night we heard from Jerome Powell, who said that he expects inflation to end the year around 3%. But he also said that he doesn't expect a large pass-through from the tariffs to inflation, basically saying that the feared impact from the tariffs on inflation hasn't materialized and doesn't look like it's going to materialize. So on inflation, Donald Trump perhaps is right and has been vindicated because we haven't seen that spike in inflation. Whether the actual tariff revenue will indeed boost government revenue, I think the verdict is still out on that one.
Carina, Kamel, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. Syrian Foreign Minister Assad al-Shibani arrived in Washington today. It's the first time a Syrian foreign minister has visited the U.S. capital in 25 years. He's expected to meet U.S. lawmakers to discuss the lifting of remaining U.S. sanctions on Syria. The visit comes as Syria and Israel engage in talks to halt Israeli airstrikes and the withdrawal of Israeli troops in southern Syria. The families of 4 passengers who died on an Air India jet that crashed in June have filed a negligence lawsuit in the US against Boeing and aircraft parts maker Honeywell. The lawsuit claims both firms knew about the faulty fuel switches and design defects that caused the accident. 229 passengers died in the crash. Saudi Arabia and Pakistan have signed a joint strategic defense agreement in Riyadh. Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman met with Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, reaffirming the long-standing relationship between the two nations. The signed agreement states that any aggression against either country shall be considered an aggression against both. We can now get more on our top story. President Donald Trump has praised the exquisite honour of his second state visit to the UK after spending the day at Chequers with the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Trump also said the UK and US partnership will get stronger and stronger after signing a new tech prosperity deal. Here's some of what he had to say.
The ties between our countries are priceless, and it's really an inheritance. It's a beautiful inheritance. Today we're making those ties closer than ever before. We've done some things that financially are great for both countries, and we work together, and it keeps us together, and I think it's an unbreakable bond we have, regardless of what we're doing today. I think it's unbreakable. But this is very big, and I want to thank all of the incredibly talented business leaders, the best in the world, biggest in the world, here this afternoon for investing in the Anglo-American alliance, and you personify an important part of the unique national bond and really a world bond. What you've done is incredible.
We can now go to Lord Marland, who's the Prime Minister's former Trade Envoy under David Cameron. Lord Marland, what a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for taking time to join us this evening.
Thank you for asking me.
Of course, absolute pleasure. Starmer says the new tech deal has the power to change lives and create 15,000 jobs in the UK. What do you make of the agreement signed today between the US and the UK?
Well, it's a stunning amount of money on paper, but the real question is whether it turns to reality. One rather hopes it does. Any investor from America investing in the United Kingdom will have to struggle with a number of things. One is the high tax regime, which is putting people off, corporation tax going up, national insurance has gone up, which means that people in the UK aren't people to the extent they were. Employment is flat and will decrease. And people in the UK are not investing in their own country. So, you know, this is big headline stuff. The reality is when they look closer, lift the bonnet open and see what the engine looks like, they may well back off.
And it's so interesting that you do say that to me, because let's talk a little bit about what's happened today. The Bank of England kept interest rates on hold. And as you mentioned to me, growth has flatlined in the UK. You also mentioned that it's a good amount of money on paper, but the tax regime, the hike in national insurance. Rachel Reeves's autumn statement is coming up soon, and we're all anticipating this. What rabbit do you think she'll pull out of the hat?
Well, she's got very few rabbits she can pull out of the hat. You know, in order to get activity and growth into the country, you need to reduce tax. This government have been pernicious against non-doms, so a lot of them have left the country. It's been pernicious about employers, businesses, because they put corporation tax up, national insurance up, And of course, income tax is at an all-time high. They're not responsible for that. The Conservative government, previous Conservative government, was responsible for that. But everything that they have been doing has been attacking the middle to upper middle class, who have been the wealth providers in the country. And we are a country of about 66 million people. Only 16 million are actually paying revenue-creating tax. In other words, they're not part of the civil service, which 40% of everyone employed in this country is paid for directly or indirectly by the government. We have a very big amount of pensioners, and we have a very big welfare state. So those are the areas which are crippling the country. But she is hand-tied on tax. She says she's not put up income tax. She can't put up corporation tax anymore because it really will kill growth, and certainly the American businesses won't invest in it. So I'm not sure what rabbit she brings out of hat. She could get rid of stamp duty or reduce that into a level that is sustainable, because there's no liquidity in the housing market. And there needs to be liquidity in the housing market because that gives people hope. It gives people turnover. It means that there's activity and there's prosperity within it. She could do that. That would be welcome. She could, of course, put a tax on higher value houses, which is something she's rumoured to be doing. But again, that's a negative for the earners, not so much the earners, but the entrepreneurial, the business people at the top end of the income tax provision.
Yes, indeed. We'll have to wait to see what Rachel Reeves does have up her sleeve. But more, Lord Marland, I just want to go to something else that was discussed today in this press conference between Donald Trump and Keir Starmer, and it was the elephant in the room. We have seen Peter Mandelson in the Oval Office with President Donald Trump, but of course today, when asked about his sacking over Jeffrey Epstein links, Trump just claimed he didn't know him. It's pretty extraordinary.
Yes, he's good. He's good at that, isn't he? And some of the stuff that the president told us about, of course, was grossly overinflated in terms of how well the American economy is doing, how much inward investment there has been. But there's no doubt about it. He has created a trajectory and optimism within the country, which is what you need to do. A lower tax regime, which would be very welcome in the United Kingdom. And he's setting, he's playing for high stakes. This is high risk strategy. But if the strategy comes off, America will be boomtown, won't it?
And he says that. He always says that. America is the biggest place to invest right now. America is hot, in Donald Trump's words. But Lord Marland, let's say President Trump said Keir Starmer is a tough negotiator today in that press conference. But do you actually think the British Prime Minister has done enough? As we know, over in the UK, he's on the political ropes. He's facing a lot of criticism. Will this get him out of hot water? No,
it won't. Even though, in fairness to the Prime Minister, he's done very well with international relationships. He has built a relationship with Trump, one of mutual interest. But and of course, he's rebuilt a number of relationships around the world. And I think he's shown a very steady hand in doing that. But that won't do him any good at home. People in the end will look at what's going on in their pockets. His reset has been dogged by scandal, and the Mandelson scandal shows utter lack of judgment from a man who's twice had been shown the yellow card, which is a phrase we use in football terms where you're about to be sent off, and then they've allowed him back on the pitch, knowing that it's a high-risk strategy, that he wasn't appointed in the correct way. Is most unusual in this country, not, of course, totally different from the States, that a non-diplomat or someone who hasn't been in the civil service is appointed to the role of ambassador. It's only the Labour Party who's really ever done that, and they've largely ended in failure. Mandelson was always a high-risk appointment, and it's ended in complete dust. It's that sort of greed and not throwing the difference between right and wrong that he and indeed Angela Rayner have demonstrated. I'm not saying this is not a party political point of view, by the way. This is because also in the Conservative Party and Reform Party we have the same issues. It's knowing the difference between right and wrong, and what you can and can't do, and not letting your eyes turn by power and greed. I'm afraid Mandelson has a history of that. He's a very able man, of course, but this was a high-risk strategy. But I tell you, the thing that will really not do the Prime Minister a very good service is that he didn't sack Mandelson himself. He got one of his minions to do it, as he did with his own reshuffle. And, a Prime Minister who won't confront individuals who he has to get rid of doesn't last for very long, because they realise he's a coward and, is a man of straw. So this will be the problem for Starmer, is that as he becomes eroded within his own party, it will be, in my view, a matter of time before he is got rid of. And I don't expect he will be fighting the next election. I don't think it'll be immediate, by the way, but I don't think he'll be fighting the next election.
Lord Marland, it was a pleasure to have you on the show and your thoughts and analysis. Thank you so much for your time this evening. France is seeing one of its biggest strikes in years as teachers, transport staff, hospital workers and more walk off the job. Over 1 million people have joined nationwide rallies disrupting schools, trains and flights. Unions want higher wages and better public services, piling pressure on the new Prime Minister, Sébastien Lecornu. For more on this, I'm joined by our Paris correspondent, Ross Cullen. Ross, a big turnout today. Over 1 million people have taken to the streets nationwide. Are these strikes just about wages, or is there something deeper at play?
No, there's so many different reasons why people are demonstrating today, Leigh-Ann. This is the area where the Paris protest has come to an end for the day. A few running battles behind me, police and protesters staying around, and the use of tear gas as well. They are demonstrating about the cost of living, against the president, against the new Prime Minister, labour conditions, problems in the job market. They are protesting against austerity. They are protesting against the pension reforms from 2 years ago as well. There have been a lot of Palestine flags. So it's been a really mixed demonstration, but with more than 1 million people taking part across the country, you can see that it's not seen at a scale since the pension reforms that I mentioned in 2023. Huge rallies 2 years ago, and last week we had the Block Everything movement. That was nothing compared to today, when we have a total number of people of more than 1 million taking part across the country.
And we can see some of them behind you there in the street, Ross. But with schools, trains and flights, all of these things disrupted, how is everyday life in France, and how are people coping with such widespread protests?
Well, the protests have been taking place at different times. For example, Leigh-Ann, Marseille, the second biggest city, had their protest this morning. The Paris protest came to an end a short time ago here down at Place de la Nation, one of the biggest squares in the French capital. So this area, you can see, is completely shut down. There are no buses running, there's no metros running, apart from the automated Line 1 round here. And then also we've seen many other areas of regular life continue. Just up the road, there was a cafe I saw on a side street, and people then are able to continue their life and continue what they are doing in their daily job. But we have seen pharmacists, we've seen firefighters, we've seen teachers. 45% of teachers have gone on strike today. So parents are having to deal with kids that would usually be in school. So we are seeing a real impact in many areas of French life. But of course, we are also seeing a lot of French life continue.
Ross, you handled that protester putting a sticker on you extremely well there. But are these strikes a sign that the French public is losing patience with Macron's legacy of austerity, or just a temporary flashpoint, do you think?
Well, it seems that Emmanuel Macron is certainly the target of many of the protesters' anger here. There have been so many calls, I've lost count today, chants calling for him to resign. They were the chants that we heard in 2023. They were the chants that the opposition MPs regularly bring up in Parliament, bring up in the streets, bring up in interviews, that they want the president to step down, even though he can constitutionally stay in power until April 2027. So a lot of demonstrators want Emmanuel Macron to step aside. They think that if you brought the presidential election from 2027 forward by 18 months, that might unlock a lot of the chaos. Protesters here are also speaking about the fact that there is instability in Parliament, that there is a real problem with the kind of logjam that they have in Parliament. Excuse for the language there you might have just heard, but they are really trying to put forward that they believe that if there is brought forward elections, or if you bring forward the presidential vote, then that might unlock the country.
Ross Cullen, thank you so much for reporting for us from those protests in France. And if anyone did hear bad language, we do apologise. Once again, Ross Cullen, thank you very much. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and also follow us on X. We'll be back in a couple of hours with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you.